Jeremy Hunt has said that he does really want to lower taxes, but he'll only do it if he can and in a, quote, responsible way.
Yeah, that's despite pressure from his own MPs to bring taxes down before the general election. Well, the Treasury Secretary, Bim Afolami, joins us now. Very good morning to you.
Morning.
The budget is on Wednesday. Given that there is guaranteed to be a general election this year, is the plan to win voters over with tax cuts?
The plan is to make sure that the country sees that we've got a responsible, prudent Chancellor doing things for the long term. And that means that over time, showing how we move to a lower tax economy over time, after all the increased spending with COVID in particular and high energy shock because of the war in the Ukraine, but also making sure we get better outputs for our public services as well.
OK, but when you say over time, you may not have much time left. Your current standing in the polls show that you would lose the general election if it was held today. So when you say over time, do you mean on Wednesday?
No. What I want to be clear, no, look, I'm not going to get into any individual taxes, but I think this is really important. You know, working with Jeremy Hunt, as I do, this is a Chancellor that thinks about the long-term productivity and growth of the economy. He's not focused on what happens next week or the week or month after. He's thinking his job as Chancellor is to govern in the national interest for the long term.
Are tax cuts in the national interest?
Well, depending on what they are and when, the important thing with tax cuts is really twofold, if you choose to do them. One is you've always got to focus on growing the economy. So we should always think about how does what we're doing grow the economy over the longer term. And then secondly, you've got to make sure you're not borrowing extra money in order to do those tax cuts, because that's reckless, unsustainable borrowing. And that's one of the reasons why we're taking the balanced approach that we are.
But you're just treading water, really, aren't you, until the election? Because, I mean, poll after poll after poll after poll for 2 or 3 years now puts you at a terrible, terrible position. I mean, the latest one says that you'd be lucky to have 65 seats. Now, I know you're going to argue that you can't rely on a poll, but they're all saying the same thing. I mean, you've only got a few weeks left, really, haven't you?
No, don't accept that. I'm old enough to remember my first election in Hitchin and Harpenden was when Jeremy Corbyn was over 20 points down and all sorts of apocalyptic predictions were made, and then he ended up gaining seats to the election. I remember it very well. We lost our majority. So, look, I think that your job in government is to think about the long term and see how you best do that. In the Treasury, we're thinking about growing the economy, making sure that that means we have the money over time to increasingly fund our public services as well as we can.
But man to man, you know you're going to lose.
Oh, there's a woman here as well, by the way.
Well, I mean, just no, me, well, OK, man and woman to man, but I was speaking for myself. Man to man, you know you're going to lose.
That is never an assumption that I make in politics, and definitely not one that I make now, because as I see things, as the debate's shaping up, people see that Labour can't be trusted on the economy and they don't have a plan. That's why Labour got rid of their really reckless commitment, or say they got rid of their reckless commitment to borrow an extra £28 billion.
OK, you know that you're the government, though, in charge during a cost of living crisis, don't you? And the trouble is that people right now feel poorer than they did when you first came into government. You've been in charge for 14 years. So the electorate are quite rightly asking, is Jeremy Hunt, Rishi Sunak, are they going to stick to their commitment, which the Prime Minister outlined in the Sun newspaper in January, promising to always prioritise tax cuts to put more of people's money back in their pockets? That's what the Prime Minister told us in January. Is that what the Chancellor will do on Wednesday?
Of course we want to make sure that people have more money in their pockets. It's why we've raised
Yes, but the Prime Minister himself said that was by prioritising tax cuts. It's a perfectly reasonable expectation that the voters will have if they've been promised that by the Prime Minister directly.
Of course, but the key is that how do you achieve that? You achieve that by taking a balanced, prudent approach, not borrowing extra money, as Labour might do, not borrowing extra money to fund that. You've got to make sure those are funded and make sure that our debt does not, make sure that our debt still falls by the end of the forecast period, as according to our fiscal rule, right? So you've got to be reasonable and prudent in how you do that. We are not reckless, and we're not going to borrow extra to do that. But we know that more money in people's pockets means that reduces the difficulties of cost of living and it grows our economy.
All right. George Garraway, for the umpteenth time, is about to take up a new seat in the House of Commons. His victory in Rochdale has been described by the Prime Minister as beyond alarming. But the people have spoken, haven't they? He won convincingly. He had a landslide victory. What do you make of it?
It's difficult because you're completely right. People have a right to choose who represents them in Rochdale. But I think that the whole situation showed me about the terrible mess of Labour in that part of the country. You know, the fact that they had a candidate who was chosen above lots of other people who expressed such terrible views. And then it took Keir Starmer days and days to work out what to do. You know, I think that really shows, in what is normally a very safe Labour seat, if we're honest, that just shows the mess that Labour hasn't really changed. In relation to George Garraway himself, you know, obviously he has a right to sit in the House of Commons, but now we're going to have to endure him, and that I think is really the fault of the Labour Party.
Should he keep his hat on?
I'm equipped to answer some questions, but not sartorial ones, I must confess.
That's fair enough.
Bim Afolami, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.